No, apologies, guys. Good morning. Right, just first of all, welcome to our webinar today on 13-week cash forecasting and how Zap BI can help solve that difficult finance process. By way of introduction, so my name is Paul Cullen. I am the CEO of a data analytics company called OneTruth. We have been working with private equity-backed companies for the last 6 years now on data analytics projects. And recently, in the last couple of months, my team has been trying to find a partner that will help us accelerate BI implementations. And we've been very fortunate to come across Zap BI on that journey. And the attraction for me is that Zap BI's product, as hopefully you'll see by the end of the webinar, is very quick to spin up in terms of building a data warehouse with multiple data sources. So you'll see that Zap can connect to many well-known systems automatically out of the box, and where it can't, data can be loaded very efficiently via Excel or uploads. It then will create the data warehouse. It will then create the data cubes, all the measures, the logic that would normally take us an awful lot of time to build in Power BI, for example. And then finally, it will produce a very nice automated reporting suite fully connected to that data. So for us as a data consultancy, it's transformed the time it takes, the spin up time to get a client up and running with a BI solution from months to days, if at the most a couple of weeks. So it's a very robust product. It's to my knowledge, Zap's been around for about 20 years now. Alexi will take you through shortly the different data connectors that exist, but you'll see that they have a lot of systems covered where they've spent that time developing the technology to be able to link in directly to some systems, particularly ones that are notoriously difficult to link into, such as Dynamics F&O is a particularly tricky ledger to get at. So yeah, so my own experience, as I say, I've been working for the last 13 years with private equity companies, but for the last 6 as OneTruth. The problem that we're going to try and address today is something that I saw as a CFO or a head of FP&A in some larger organizations, whereby the private equity owners were requesting 13-week cash forecasts every Monday to be produced. And that process typically took most of a Monday all day across the whole organization to both produce the forecast and then bring it all consolidated and then understand what went wrong versus the previous forecast a week ago. So it's a problem I've seen throughout my career, especially in private equity space, where this is a very arduous process for finance people to go through. So hopefully by the end of today's presentation, you'll see that there's quite an elegant solution using Zap BI to resolve that. So that's kind of, so again, some of the problems that you typically see with PE companies doing this is that the requirement usually comes from the fact that there's a quarterly covenants commitment that the company and the PE owners have made that cannot be breached. And that's kind of, to me, the main driver why 13-week cash forecasting is so important, to make sure that at the end of each quarterly period, there's no risk of being in breach of any of the bank covenants or guarantees. So it's a pretty critical process, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. In terms of just by way of explaining more about Zap and their pedigree, so as I say, Zap has been around for about 20 years. They have some very significant clients, including Costa Coffee. Finlay's Tea is the largest tea producer in the world. Benefits Cosmetics is another one of their clients. So they have a strong pedigree in terms of delivering solutions to larger organizations. So that's kind of the intro as to who's who. Sorry, I should say Alexi is the Director of Operations for Zap. And David Ramirez, who will be joining us, is a pre-sales solutions expert who will be walking, he'll be driving the bus later on when we show some of the demo.
This actually gives me a nice holistic view of how the business is actually doing. First part I've got on the top here is where we look at our slices. So if I've got multiple companies, for example, like I do over here, I can actually look at this, in a consolidated view now where I'm looking at all the companies. I can also go maybe select maybe one or two, or let me do 4 companies, for example, and you'll see that all those numbers actually just start changing just based on what I've selected there. So from here, I'm actually going to select on all and just get these numbers all back to where they were. And I can start looking at now, for example, at a different point in time. So obviously with Zap, we do have that time function built in here where we can actually start looking at, month by month or by quarter or total to date, or even do sort of year to date calculations. So from there, once I've now made my selection, you'll see that we've got our next part here where we talk about our performance cards. Now in these performance cards, this is actually taking those numbers and it's producing it in a rich text format quite quickly. So I can now look at this and make decisions quite quickly just based on what I've selected on the top here. So I can see, like with my performance cards, I can see what my net sales is, my gross margin percentage. I can look at my cash activities, my profitability, my liquidity, and obviously my leverage. If you look at everything on the left-hand side, that's really got to do with my income statement. Everything in the middle is where we're looking at our cash. How are we dealing with our cash, for example? And everything on the right-hand side is where we look at our balance sheet. Now, we also have this functionality where, for example, if I hover over December, you'll see that, like, for example, my net sales, and that actually ties into the number that you're seeing on the performance card above. But now I can actually start looking at this now more of a granular level where I can start seeing month by month what my net sales were and what my cost of goods were, and obviously my gross margin percentage. We also have functionality where we can actually drill down. So for example, if I wanted to actually query that particular month and see where that net sales actually come from, this actually breaks it down to the actual days of that month now, where I can actually see that amount coming through. So if I want to just drill up, it'll take me straight back to now where I'm actually looking this, where I'm looking month by month on my fiscal year. Or I could actually even drill up, for example, into maybe quarters. So now I'm actually looking at my net sales, cost of goods, and my gross margin, where I'm looking at now by that particular quarter. So we actually build, as part of the solution, we actually build that hierarchy of the dates where we can actually now break it down by year, quarter, month, and date, or we can even do certain week patterns like 42, 53 weeks, those kind of things, for example. Another function where we look at now, for example, if I'm just going to take this, for example, I look at this 11.8 million on my AR, and I actually want to know how is it actually broken down. So if I look at my last year number, I can see what my last month number was, but I actually want to go into this and say, you know what, give me a drill through report. And that actually, because we bring in all the detail from your ERP system, this will actually break it down into that lowest level where I'm actually looking at this now by item, for example, or by transaction, and I can actually see those amounts. And I'm just going to move this out of the way, unfortunately. And obviously, for example, if I want to export this to a PDF, CSV, or Excel, I have that abilities where I can do that now and maybe do some further analytics on that. So like any browser, if I click on the back button, this will take me straight back to my CFO dashboard. Now what I want to do is, for example, as the CFO, I've actually looked at all this information. I'm quite happy with what I've seen. I actually want to move on to like the next thing, for example, maybe my income statement. Now I could actually go and click on here, for example, and browse around and get to the income statement. But what I would also like to do is I can actually go and say, open up the income statement dashboard from this particular dashboard, and all the filters that actually get applied from the previous dashboard. So whatever I've selected on the slices, you'll see, for example, are being actually applied in this particular dashboard. So now I've got my, my P&L where I'm looking at this over the month, for example, or even over by the year. And then we've got some analytics on the right-hand side here based on what we're seeing on the left-hand side. So I'll take for an example, if I look at these operating expenses, this 18,931, and I want to see what that actually makes up. Any number that's in the system, if I literally double click on it, or I right click and say create a drill through report, it'll actually bring me down to that lowest level where I'm actually looking at all those transactions. All right, so maybe what we'll do, for example, if I go into finance, and what we'll do is we'll go into the general ledger now. Now, while this is actually doing, this is as I said, this is a browser-based application. This can run on any device, any browser. So you'll actually see that this actually works really, really well on a tablet, for example. So I've gone to the general ledger. We've already looked at the income statement dashboard. What we'll maybe want to do is maybe we can look at our expenses. I'm just going to give my system a second to refresh it. So we'll go into the expense dashboard. And this is now where we're actually looking at our expenses, where we can look at it, over the last 12 months, for example. We've got our sort of month to date on expenses, where we're looking at the quarter to date versus the prior quarter to date. And we're even doing some variance calculations there, for example, or even looking at just how we're tracking for the year when it comes to our expenses. We even have a little bit of a breakdown where we can see, out of that, what is my general expenses, what's payroll, what's depreciation, obviously, and what's insurance. So from there, we'll go back into the general ledger, and just to show you some of the other reports that you get out of the box, for example, is where once you've actually implemented this, not only are you getting some dashboards, you've also got some reports that you can actually use, like, for example, like a balance sheet, an income statement with an annual overview. So, for example, we had a look at this income statement, which is in the dashboard. Let's have a look at the one with the annual overview, where I'm now looking at that income statement, with month by month now for that fiscal year. All right, and obviously a trial balance. So what I'll do, for example, now is just one more last dashboard, and then I will sort of hand over to David and to Paul. If I go back into finance, and I go into accounts receivable, and we'll go into, so every single module has their own, we have different dashboards for every single module. In fact, there can be some reports in there, there's some dashboards, and we cater for all those different personas within the business. Now, let's have a quick look at this. If we look at our accounts receivable manager dashboard, we can see our overdue receivables by age. We can look at our current receivables by age. We can see obviously what our top 10 overdue AR is, and even what our top 10 current AR is. We take all that logic that's in the ERP system, when we look at the due days and things like that David was speaking about, and we actually apply that in here, where we can now start putting these into certain aging buckets. So, for example, if I look at my overdue receivables by age, and I look at, I want to see all my customers, and where we break it into these specific aging buckets. And then you'll see that, for example, it'll actually break it into those amounts, into those different aging buckets where you can actually see that. So this is done all for you. This is all the heavy lifting that's already been done, and you don't really need to worry about that kind of stuff because it's actually done. It's already done. Now, another part here where we look at this performance card on the right-hand side is where we start measuring our collection effectiveness, where we start looking at our days sales outstanding. And obviously, these are the metrics, which is our best possible DSO, and obviously our average days delinquent. Now, maybe that's something in your business that you're not really calculating yet, and you might actually see some value in that. And if you want to actually understand how that is actually broken down, if I actually hover over this number, you'll see, for example, that it'll actually show you now how that's actually broken down and where those numbers actually come from and how we work that out. Excuse me. All right. So that's then obviously, for example, so that's on the Zap BI, and obviously what I've done is just as part of this is I've actually downloaded one of our Power BI dashboards, for example, where you can also, as David spoke about our platform being visual agnostic, if you've got some investment obviously within Power BI, it's not something to worry about. For example, you can actually plug this into our data management portion, and you can actually start using this and look at these numbers and that. So that's concludes sort of what I wanted to show you today with the pre-built dashboards. And I'm going to actually pass over back to Paul and David.
I'll make a couple of comments there, Alexi. So in terms of, my experience has been mainly, most of my clients have been Power BI clients. What I find is the amount of configuration time that it takes to build what falls out of the box right here, to build that in Power BI is so much longer, and you've got so much of the standard type reports already ready to go, and things like calendars are pre-configured. We've had clients where in the health space where they had 3 different calendars going on, one for national health, one for calendar year, and one for, I can't even remember what the other one was, but there were 3 different reporting calendars. Very difficult to model that in Power BI, whereas with Zap, you can have as many different calendars as you need, and you can report against multiple calendars if you wish. So there's that point. Being able to create drill throughs on the fly is a really nice thing, because with Power BI you have to pre-configure that for the user. So that's nice that you can do that on the fly. But just the very fact that so much of this is already pre-configured, all the measures are built. So if you did want to use Power BI to do the visualizations, all the measures are already in the data hub that you'll need. So you're literally just concentrating on the visualization piece rather than having to design measures or calculations or calendars. And it just, for me, it saves an enormous amount of time in terms of getting it spun up. Alexi, just before you get off the hook, do you happen to have, sorry to doorstep you, but do you happen to have the report? There is a board pack that you guys have as a demo. I just wanted to illustrate to people that you can produce a text report that pulls in measures dynamically into the report, that saves someone having to do. There's a sample you showed me, Alexi, where you have that. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to quickly download that. So while that's actually just pulling down, for example, yeah. One thing just to add as well, and apologies for not showing this, is that, you know, when we actually look at creating a report, it's really just as easy as just dragging and drop, you know, these measures and these attributes to create your own type of reporting. And I'm sure that you'll probably see that a little bit further shortly. But let me just quickly just give you an example of what a report pack can actually look, and this gets created within Zap, for example. So if I have a look at this is like a cover page. There's a dashboard, and I'll just go through a couple of these others. There's, for example, an income statement, and then, for example, this is like where we actually give a summary of how the business is actually doing. So, for example, if this board pack had to go out to certain C-level execs, and this can be automated, where it'll automatically be sent out on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, they'll actually get this. Now, just something to appreciate from your example is, in the summary that you're seeing here, all these numbers that you're seeing are actually being the up-to-date numbers when this is actually being generated at that time. So those same numbers that you saw in those performance cards that I showed you, this is essentially those same numbers that are being updated at that time when the board pack is actually being created, or generated, should I say, not created. So this is it's completely automated. There's no human person that needs to actually do this. This is actually automatically happening.
I should say that includes things like, so that last line where it says Sage Compass users have increased by 65%. So within the model, you can write a measure that figures out whether the words should have increased by or have decreased by, depending on whether the number's positive or negative, which I think is really cool for putting together your month-end board pack, or even if you're in a sale transaction and you needed to get the narrative put together quickly and know that the numbers are robust. This is all dynamically linked to the data source. So that's the key point I wanted to draw out.
Cool. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. All right. So David, I don't know if you want to share your screen quickly.
Yes. Let me see. Please let me know when you see my screen.
David, just while you're doing that, I'll just give a bit more background on the problem that we were trying to deal with. So as I mentioned earlier, I've had a lot of experience as a senior finance guy in various industries, where all PE backed, where this problem of 13-week cash forecasting was common across the board. It was typically an Excel nightmare. One company A didn't talk to company D internally to agree what they were assuming on the cash forecast, as in, you know, I'm going to pay you in week 4 and I'm going to receive from you in week 4. And so typically what would happen on a Monday morning is you bang all these Excel spreadsheets together, and then you realize that the intercompany cash flows don't even agree, because there hasn't been a conversation. There hasn't been time to have a conversation between various intercompany entities to agree what their cash forecast is going to be over the period. And that I've seen that cause enormous frustration with CFOs thinking, why can't my own guys speak to each other about what they're assuming for the cash forecast? So that's a problem. The speed at which it happens. So every Monday you've got 20 or 30 different entities in the company all trying to feed in this cash forecast. Someone then has to consolidate it, excuse me, and then see, does it actually make any sense? And then they have to figure out what happened versus 7 days ago. Why did I not land at $1 million in the bank? Why am I minus $2 million? Someone tell me what just happened, and have they revised the cash forecast to pick up that gap? So those are the typical things I've seen happen. The amount of time that's invested in this each week by finance people, and I'm talking about senior finance people, I'm talking about at director and CFO level, trying to get this right. It struck me for a long time that this is a problem that needs to be solved, and I haven't seen anything that's sort of off the shelf ready that can do this, and so that's the reason why I myself and Zap got together to see can we find a way to make this a lot simpler. So that's the background to the problem we're trying to solve. All right, so we'll start with sort of the mechanics, and then we'll show you what it looks like when it's done. So what's happening in this analysis? This is the 13-week look ahead, and I'll just talk you through what's happening in each line. So first of all, the cash flow is done by currency. So the model knows to go and look at the balance sheet. It knows which bank accounts are euro, which are GBP, which are USD by a simple one-off mapping, or if it's not obvious in the GL account itself. Okay, so this is all about trying to aggregate currencies cash flows by currency. If you wanted to and needed to, there's no reason why you couldn't do this by specific bank account, so long as it exists as a discrete entity on the GL, which it will. But for now, we've just assumed, let's look at it in total currency buckets. Okay. So what it's doing, first of all, is saying opening balance. It's saying go and read from my balance sheet live. What is the opening balance at the end of week 19 per the booked balance? Okay. Then we get into the interesting bit. So receipts from customers. What it's doing is saying, okay, I know all the open invoices that are in the system right now. Okay, and I know what the due dates are of those invoices. So I could just lay those out in a cash flow and say that's when it's going to happen. But that's not what happens in reality. In reality, customers pay late, and in reality, we pay some vendors later than they're due. So what this model will do is it will look at the history of each customer going back 3, 6, whatever period of time you want, and look to see what was the payment profile versus due date on the invoice. How late was that customer? 7 days, 10 days, whatever. And then it will apply that logic to all the open invoices that are still to be received and lay those out in the cash flow according to that new date with that adjustment applied. So that's the first principle. Does that with both customers and vendors. So we're talking about a form of artificial intelligence, and that can be modified and tweaked to whatever is specific to your requirements. For example, if there were only certain customers you knew were high risk and normally paid late, there's no reason at all why we wouldn't do that at a customer level. That logic and allows some of them to come through the cash flow according to the actual due date, or some to be delayed according to payment history. So that's the logic that's going on with the receipts from customers and the payments to vendors lines. The two lines describing customers overdue and vendors overdue is then looking at the due date of the invoices in your system and saying anything that is overdue as of this first week, treat them as if they're going to land in the cash flow in week 1. Now, that's a holding position. I'll describe how you can change that in a moment. But what it's doing is saying, assume that all overdue stuff lands this first week. Okay, that's the first point. Now, once we've got the receipts from the working capital piece, let's call it, then there will be other cash events that do not exist, the details of which do not exist in your ERP system. For example, next month's payroll, direct debits, VAT payments, etc., etc. So there are other events that are not in your invoicing detail. And what we've done is built a very simple, really simple Excel template upload that is connected directly to this report. And you just literally say which week number, what is it, what's the amount, plus or negative, and you load that into the detail. So for example, David, if you wouldn't mind drilling into the 51K in the fourth column, what is this 51K? So that is the payroll. Should be the, I think you need to go into it, yeah. Sorry, I got you in the wrong screen, that one. So this 51K is an upload of 2 transactions. The payroll for, well, we should have changed it. Sorry, I've just noticed that the same date they were meant to be. So one was meant to be June and one was meant to be May. But anyway, what it's showing you is 2 manual transactions that have been uploaded by a simple spreadsheet with these headings on it: currency, date, description, and that's on value basically. So that's saying, okay, I need to remember I've got the payroll to go through on the 31st of May. So that's how that non-invoice detail is captured. Okay, David, if you just jump back again, please. Yeah, to here. Right. So when all that is known, okay, so the vast majority of that is taking transactional data and mapping it into whichever week it should appear in cash flow terms after factoring in any typical delays on those customers or vendors. And once you have that, then it's giving you the ability to very simply upload other transactions that you know will happen in that window to allow the cash flow to be complete. So once this is the mechanics of the table. Now we'll look at the output once that has been, this mechanical piece is being performed, and really the user is only making a few decisions here. One around whether to delay any customers or vendors, and 2, what other non-cash events need to be uploaded to make the cash flow complete. Okay, and this is for Euro. We've also got the similar for GBP. So now when that's done, then we have the output, the dashboard. All right, so this is then the output of that exercise. So we've got the forecast balances by week, showing you now, again, that this is looking at Euro. You can change this to currency if you need to. That's all right. In the top, look at the top right-hand corner, it's saying, okay, in which week is my minimum balance? And this is where you would start to think about what is my covenant level? What level can I not go below on this account? So you'll see there 34.9 on week 23 is the lowest point in the 13-week cash forecast. The AR aging and the AP aging donuts are showing for the full 13 weeks of cash received and cash paid out, what was the split of those between late and not late, so overdue and versus per contract. We're then showing for customers and vendors the top 5 receipts and payments by value by vendor. So you can see my biggest receipt was coming in from, or receipts could be plural, coming in from distributed farms of 25.8K, and similarly my big vendor called main vendor was the one I paid the most to over the period of time. And then what else? And within these, then you can then drill through. So David, if you want to, I think the Ciclo Bellas will show. We can see, okay, what's actually coming through here? Okay, this is the invoice that we think is getting paid that date. And again, that's with the delayed invoice date applied to it using the logic I described earlier. And similarly, you can do the same thing with vendors. So you can very quickly drill through to think, does this make sense? Does this cash flow actually make sense to me? Now, one of the things that I think would be very useful, and so this is a proof of concept that we've worked up to show that ZAP can be used to resolve a problem like 13-week cash forecasting. There are lots of other enhancements that we could make to this. One of which would be, for example, to show a report that says what would my cash flow look like if if I don't make any changes to the invoice due date, if I just believe that everyone is going to pay me on time, or I'm going to pay everyone else on time, versus what have I done to the cash flow? In other words, how have I, what decisions have I made around that cash flow? Why does that matter? Because typically, if the finance manager is doing this and he or she are making decisions around delaying a customer receipt, or more importantly, probably deliberately deciding to delay a vendor payment, the CFO is probably going to want to know what are those decisions you've made, to understand whether or not, for example, if you've delayed vendor ABC by 2 weeks, the CFO may know that that vendor cannot be delayed because for example, they've threatened to stop supply. In which case, the CFO would be informed to be able to tell the finance manager, put that one back, put it back to where it's supposed to be. So that's the sort of thing you could do very easily, like a before and after, to show how much you've leveraged how much you've torqued the cash flow. I think another area would be another thing, the report would be really useful, and I mentioned this earlier, was the intercompany picture. So a matrix that would show all of the intercompany balances against each other, and all you're looking for is a sheet full of zeros for each week to say there are no differences between all the payments and all the receipts for intercompany parties total to zero each week, which is what they should do. And straight away you would see there's a problem in, for example, week 29 or something, that says, oh, company A has got a different, company A's payment is different to company B's receipt, and they should be the same. So that allows you very quickly to go back and make the change to make sure that the cash flow is not out of balance because of intercompany, which really it never should be. But in the rush to get cash flows done each week, I've seen this happen so many times, and it's just a complete waste of time, where people are going to all this effort, and then when the cash flow comes through, it doesn't agree because two intercompanies haven't talked to each other. So this would give you a really quick way of seeing that, or if you're an intercompany party yourself, you could run this report to make sure that your balances are the same as all your other intercompany counterparties, and know that when you upload, your numbers are going to be good. So that's kind of the 13-week cash forecasting solution that we wanted to describe to you today. As I say, this is a proof of concept at the moment, and we can see lots of other improvements that could be made that would make this even more useful, to make this process take. This should really take, something like this, I think, should take a matter of, half an hour or an hour a week, not a day a week, which I've seen it regularly take. So that kind of concludes what I wanted to show you on 13-week cash forecasting. Right.
So yeah, go for it, David.
One thing that I would like to add is that in the report that Alexis showed in a moment, where we can actually send a report pack, we can basically configure that based on specific KPIs. For example, here we have a cash cycle KPI, which is basically comparing our receipts against our payments. So right now, we are excluding in this KPI the other payments that can be out of the ERP. So basically, based on this KPI, we can basically configure a rule where, hey, when it's below a specific metric or a budget that we have, or a target, please automatically send me this dashboard with other reports that can basically help me understand what is happening behind the scenes, right? And be proactive in order to analyze the data. Also, some other things that we can actually analyze this, and I'm not sure if you, Paul, want to explain it, is basically here we're analyzing the 13 cash flow forecast, but we can also see what happened. For example, here we can see that our receipts from the customer, we have a 15.81, which is overdue.
David, let me just put in there. Sorry, guys. Somehow I managed to forget the other piece, which was the what happened versus what I thought was going to happen analysis, which is what David's about to talk to there. So, as I mentioned earlier, one of the big problems is not only the time taken to put together the cash forecast, but to understand why did my balance end up at a different place that I said it would a week ago. So David, if you wouldn't mind showing the report that shows the performance versus previous week. So we'll just look at customers here. So okay, this is the example. So we're assuming that we're not showing week 19, but in week 19 we're saying we were expecting 10,411 by these customers. What we've received, and this is looking back at the bank transactions for that with that customer ID tagged to it, and if that doesn't exist, then looking at the sales ledger itself to pick up what actually came in, what was cleared as received in the week, and therefore what do we miss? So this answers the question straight away. We're now in week 20, looking back at week 19 to figure out what happened, and the answer is, well, Ciclo Bellas didn't pay what we thought they were going to pay, and now we've included them in this week as a must pay. So that's a really useful report. We've only shown 3 customers here. You could imagine if there's 350 customers here, and you need to understand quickly where did the big difference come from. This would be exactly the kind of report that you'd want to be able to spin up really quickly to say, I know where the problem is. Same thing with vendors. We haven't shown it here, but you can run exactly the same report on vendors to say, oops, I've overpaid a vendor. I didn't mean to pay him 20,000. I was only supposed to pay him 2,000. And this answers the question, why did I land at the position that I landed in? Where is the gap versus last week? And I can tell you from experience, this is a really tricky process for finance managers to have to go back through to their AR staff across 15, 20 companies in the organization to say, can someone tell me what happened here? And then to feed that all back up again through into the CFO or to the group financial controller. That can be a really painful process. This takes that all away and tells you straight away, this is what happened. Okay, sorry, David, thanks for pointing that out. I don't know how I've managed to almost forget that. So we have 12 minutes left. Is there anything, David or Alexi, that we want to still touch on further before we open the Q&A?
So Paul, I think we can sort of move on to into the Q&A side of things. I've got a question here. With this being a proof of concept, how long did this actually take to build?
Okay, Alex, you want to speak to that?
Yeah. Well, it depends obviously on which is the data source that we are connecting with. I would say that, for example, if we are using some of the previous solutions that we have, like SAP Business One or Dynamics or Business Central, Sage, SysPro, it's something that it would take something around maybe 1 day or 2. I think it took me something around 8 hours. So if it's another solution that we need to build from scratch, well, it might be definitely a bit more of time, but the time is, I mean, it's not months, right? It's just about maybe a couple of days to have everything up and ready.
I mean, it's days. I mean, I'll just jump in on that one too. I mean, I hate to say it depends, but it sort of does, in the sense that if the systems, and obviously in a company where there are multiple platforms, it could be NAV, it could be SAP, there could be all kinds of things. There could be some system some weird system that no one's ever heard of before, and normally that data only makes its way into the reporting each month by some kind of Excel upload or into Hyperion or something, for example. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if the system is already something that there is a SAP connector built for, that's very, very quick. You're talking about a matter of hours. If, however, as is in the example here, sorry, in this example, we've used a lot of Excel uploads here. There's a little bit of configuration time, but again, we're talking about a matter of a few days, not weeks or months. So this is something that, because of the way the data is structured, because of the data governance within SAP BI, and the fact that everything needs to be mapped, needs to be configured, and then lots of the measures are already existing, they're already built, and the calculations, then that makes the whole process a lot quicker to spin up. Basically, that this was spun up between myself, David, and Alexi over a matter of probably a few days. By just from scratch, so that's one of the things I like about it as a data practitioner myself. I love the fact that this can be brought to life very quickly. Things like this, and this is just one example of the kinds of customization and uses to which ZAP BI can be put over and above, the data hub and the reporting suite. So it was an interesting challenge for the ZAP guys to go, oh yeah, we could do this, So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so I've got another question here. How do you forecast cash inflows and outflows that aren't being unwound by the ledger? Are they done by local finance teams, or are you forecasting these centrally as well?
Forecasting these. Sorry, that aren't being unwound. Can they be a little bit more specific? Like what, for example?
So you say for basically new sales, for example.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry, I'm with you now. Yes, right. Okay. So if starting with the principle that this model is talking to the data warehouse that has all of the ERP transactions in it, yeah, that's the starting point. So that's a great question, actually. What happens to all the stuff that's going to be invoiced across the 13-week period and received or paid, vice versa, that isn't in my ERP system right now? That's very simple. You would use the Excel upload template to at a high level, or if you wanted to do it at a customer and vendor level, you can. There's no reason why not. But at a high level, you would upload those the value of those sales, and when you think the due date will be for those, and then they will come in through. They can either come in through the other cash events line, or we could map them to come in through the receipts from customers line and just show it as a separate line saying forecast items. It's a great question, actually. How do you deal with stuff that hasn't happened yet but will land in the 13-week period? Yeah. So the answer is upload them through the simple Excel template in whatever level of detail you want, either at customer level or at an aggregation. But the important thing is the date that you think it's going to hit. Hopefully.
And I think if I can add just to that, and that's really because we can bring in multiple sources of data into the model, like your Excel data as well, to bring those. All right, and then the next question from the same person is, and is that done by the local finance team, right?
Yes, it would be done by the local finance. Yes, that's right. It would be. So if you imagine you would have each finance manager across, let's say, I keep saying 15. Say there was a company with 15 entities in it. You would have a finance manager with their own access and their own upload rights, seeing what we're seeing here, but specifically for their entity. So they would be just restricted to that one entity or 2 or 3 entities if they happen to be across 2 or 3 entities. So yeah, they would then upload in this using the same format template. Exactly, everyone would use the same template that's pre-configured to map directly into the cash flow forecast here. They would use that template, and that's how it would go in. What they would do, and what's important to say is, David, if you wouldn't mind just drilling into the other cash events again here, any one of those items. The key thing is when they put that upload in, that they have a description that says what it is. Okay, so you'll see here in this one, in the Excel file, there is a comment that says rephase overdue payables. So if someone was going to do that, what you're asking for there, which is future receivables, future payables, they would put a line in here that says expected receipts from customer ABC, or they could just do total expected forecast receipts, so that they know when they come to the dashboard, where did this amount come from? What is it? That's how they would do it. And each finance user and for each entity would take responsibility, or it could be done at a group level, whichever, there's no reason, whatever level of hierarchy works best. It could just be you could have it done at a high level. The group FC makes a call to say, I'm going to put 1 million into, week 6 for stuff that hasn't been, the invoice hasn't been raised for yet, but I expect to get it then. So you can have it at whatever level of access you wanted.
All right, great, perfect. Okay, so the next question, and maybe this is for myself and David, what technical skills do staff need with SAP? So I don't know, David, do you want to answer this question?
Well, it depends on what part of the solution we're looking at. I would say that, for example, when it comes to building a report, it's just about dragging and dropping. You don't require any technical really skills. I mean, we can build a report in Excel. I think it's something similar here. For example, I would just modify this a little bit. I want to add an extra slicer to slice and dice information. It's just about dragging and dropping, and we don't need to do any complex things. For example, here, some of the calculations that we're doing, for example, here we have receipts from customers. It's just the receipt from customers that comes from the model that we built, and we just add a specific, for example, label and tag, which is the not late, right? So this is the receipt from customers. This is the overdue, which has the late label. And here, for example, in the movements, we're making some calculations, right? Where we are basically saying, all right, this is the receipt plus the receipts overdue minus the payments plus the other cash events, and that's my movements. So basically, this is how we make this logic. We have total calculations, which is here entirely. It's really easy. It's just about opening this formula, which is already pre-built, and we don't need to know any coding language in order to build the report. And now when it comes,
it might be useful for me as a kind of consumer to address that question too. So my team probably did 3 web-based training sessions, which lasted about 2 to 3 hours with the SAP guys. And we started at the very basic level and then we went right up to advanced modeling. And those training courses were superb. So in terms of the learning curve, you know, because of how good the training I think is, I think you'll find that anyone who has any kind of affinity or propensity for working with spreadsheet type database sort of analyses, anyone, to be honest with you, a lot of the logic in this is very similar to Excel logic, and you know, and if statements and sums and all that kind of sum ifs. So I as a consumer, I would say that the training is very, very good, and people can get up to speed really quickly. And in terms of doing most of the stuff they'll want to do themselves, building their own reports certainly is very straightforward.
All right, I'm just a little bit conscious of time. I think we've got time for one more question. So this question is, what distribution methods do we have for ZAP board packs and dashboards?
Okay, Alexi.
Okay, do you want me to answer that, or David? I think you can answer that.
Distribution methods, we can basically, the report packs, we can send them by email. We can actually, it depends on the type of the report, but we can, for example, we can export this in an Excel formatting. We can export this on a CSV file, or we can export this on a PDF file.
Okay, I think together with that, you've got obviously your publication rules where you can automate those reports to be automatically sent out via email from the system. And then we also have an option where you can actually embed a dashboard, for example, in your intranet or onto your ERP system, where you can actually embed those dashboards as well into other systems. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. All right, guys. So we've hit that mark of where the time is now sort of complete for the webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining. And that sort of concludes what we wanted to show today. So thank you very much.
Alexi, can I just check? Is there any forum then for the guy? Any other questions that might come up to be fed through after the seminar or the webinar?
So they can obviously there will be an email, I think, and then the people that have registered, there will be a recording that will go out. Yeah. So on that, you can obviously forward your questions to the email that will be that I think is provided already.
Okay, great.
Great.
Well, just to wrap it up, I hope you found that useful, guys, and thank you very much for taking an hour out of your day to learn more about ZAP BI.
Great. Thanks, Paul, and thanks for being on our session.
Cheers. Take care.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.